Yeah, I mean, we all we went to the plan proposal about a year ago, which we were very hopeful on. Unfortunately, but
So how long have you been?
IRI
technical
for almost a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where were you before that?
Some money.
Hewlett Foundation, DFID, RTI, ITADs.
Wow, right.
Yeah, QED.
No, this is from our last meeting.
Yeah.
But they didn't give us the food till
Most
the
of my
end of the meeting.
experience.
That's a good boy.
Sorry.
But
Sorry.
you're
Right.
I'm really excited.
I was really excited with your cheese.
Yeah.
I'm from Iraq.
I've got my kids.
Yeah,
Speak
thank you.
the language, so-
Yeah, I've seen a lot about
Got snap
Yeah.
peas at home.
I've been following
But then
the
the UK 2007, 2008, the first of the world. Yeah.
doing what you're doing.
IBA.
We also had to go 3 days to
From there, like I was really shaper.
I know, it's recording.
Yeah.
Yeah, just make sure no one unplugs that before you have to restart the entire system.
Thank you.
Yeah.
2012 I came here. Yeah.
Enjoying it. Yeah. Really good. I did my MBA in University of Gloucestershire, which was 18 months ago.
Bristol,
Yeah.
20 people here.
How did you find Bristol then? Were you living there?
Yes.
40 people.
2 years.
Beautiful city.
Which part were you living? Chelsea, it's like where the university, like it's like kind of in the suburb.
Some of them work for
It's like more than 10 years.
No.
Yeah.
It's quite familiar work having done
You
that.
go back to the UK.
Work on the capability,
Over there.
this capability statement. And we'll get the final ITAD that we'll generate. I'm saying 60 questions. 20,000 running much. It wasn't just like a one thing.
Not.
It was.
Hello.
It was every
How are you?
How are you?
The whole body of our work.
Incredible. Incredible.
Tony Brown's changed. So were you hanging on Tony?
Yeah.
But your boss told me to find.
Oh, I thought she was talking about the other. She made it.
I just sent you a message. The main. You can disregard it.
I will disregard it.
But it did remind me of my hilarious message I sent you.
Let's just wait a couple of minutes to see whether any will it.
We have Munima, our
I
marine
think
evaluation person.
Hopefully,
joining
Munyema
by
is online.
Hi.
Hi, Munyema.
Hi, Alan.
We can't quite see you because the PowerPoint is up, and I'm not sure how to switch between the two.
That perfectly suits me as well.
Can you see us?
Yes, I can see you all.
Oh dear.
And
Thank
the banana in your hand.
Join in.
It is that camera, isn't it? Yes.
Yes.
No, I just tried to find mine out.
Something terrible with these chips. Yeah.
No, it's very funny.
This is a regular Wednesday lunch that you do with OGP now.
No, we had a retirement thing.
A retirement thing.
Retirement enrollment. So they make lunches with them.
Seems to be a normal standard.
There are. Did you like? They're up for grabs.
There you go.
Slightly more
Go,
tempting
move,
than
move, go.
well, slightly more tempting than your 2 bananas.
What could be more tempting than super dog?
Yeah.
You pull your crown
Super
back
nice
up.
and a munchie.
This item is technically called a brown bag, but anything around lunchtime turns into a brown bag.
The boxes are up for grabs.
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about bananas. That was
Yeah,
Yeah.
go grab it.
There you go.
See how I very subtly opened that conversation by asking about those boxes.
Yeah, Andrew, would you like one?
I'm okay with that, thank you. I love this collaborative working and eating space.
It's mostly collaborative eating.
It's very true.
Oh, come on, we have our bake-offs within ITAD.
We do, but that's very, very British, isn't it? The great ITAD vehicle.
It went on for weeks and weeks and weeks, and it was just like this volume of cakes being eaten. Like,
That's a baffling thing for you to.
Knowing that you're not really interested in those chips or the cooking,
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll definitely
Well,
take
I was
that
gonna
off
offer you
your
my
hands.
chip stand.
Oh, really? Well,
Yeah.
I mean,
In
I think
addition, wow.
he can handle all of them with no issue.
David, when John will be back with his box, we will kick off. And,
Making everyone online jealous.
have you got some breakfast, Munyema? Or coffee?
Not yet.
We would share our roti box, but can't do it.
That's the technology we have and how to do that.
Yeah. Working on it. Cool. I think we'll kick off then. Very happy to have colleagues from ITAD here today. Richard Burge, who leads ITAD's work on governance, and Andrew McConaughey, who leads ITAD's business development work.
I do.
Did I get that right?
That's right.
I'm a big fan of ITAD. I have been for a number of years. I've kind of known ITAD for like 10 or 12 years from some of their work on big DFID funded deepening democracy programs many years ago, and some of that still continues, I think. And I've been very interested to see some of the work that they've been doing on governance programming over recent years. And I think, in terms of their thinking and their kind of pragmatic but creative approach to monitoring, evaluation, and learning, they're kind of one of the most interesting outfits I've seen. So I'm very pleased to have them in the hub today to hear a bit about the work you've been doing and things that you're kind of working on. Before we kick off, let's go around the room so everybody knows who's in the room. I know nearly everybody in the room, but to my shame, not everybody. I guess not everybody knows who I am. So I'm Alan Hudson. I'm the Executive Director of Global Integrity. We are, along with Development Gateway, one of the organisations who set up the OpenGov Hub and who manage and run the OpenGov Hub. We also do a lot of work on governance and anti-corruption, with a very strong focus on adaptive learning and supporting locally led innovation, learning and adaptation.
I'm Honora Gordon. I'm the grants officer for the Open Government Partnership.
I'm John Sardi, I'm the CEO of Development Gateway, and very happy to be a partner with ITAD and a number of efforts. And we try to bring the data revolution to the country's space.
I'm Richard Burge. I'm Associate Director at ITAD, covering governance and gender. Very pleased to be here.
I'm Joe Fody. I work for the independent reporting mechanism of the Open Government Partnership.
I'm Megan Campbell. I'm the Manager of Research and Learning for Feedback Labs.
And I'm Johannes Tunn. I work with Global Integrity and lead our work on integrity and anti-corruption.
Michael Moses, also Global Integrity. I lead a lot of our learning.
Sheldon Kobo, I'm a specialist with IRI, the International Republic Institute.
Cool. And Munyema?
Hi, I'm Munima. I work for the Open Government Partnership in the CLIC team, which stands for Knowledge, Learning, Innovation, and Capacity Building.
Cool, very good. The format, we've got until 1:30. Richard and Andrew are going to talk us through a little bit about ITAD's experience and approach, as it says. And then we'll open up for some questions about MEL and governance programming and ITAD's approach. So I appear to have control of the slides, so one or both of you can kick me when I need to move on.
Very long way.
Cool. Okay, over to you.
Well, firstly, thank you very much for hosting us. and having this opportunity. We did groundbreaking ventures in a similar way as well within ITAD. We bring people in from the outside and just kind of share knowledge and learn about things. Alan and I have had a number of discussions over the last year or so. I joined ITAD just over a year, so did Andrew, so we're relatively new. I'm not new to this area of work. My whole background is in international development politics, right from a very early age. And I've worked in civil society, I've worked within government, both in a political role and a technical role. And I now work for a company called ITAD, which we'll explain a little bit about in a moment. And Alan set me an exam question. I want to produce some slides, which will be very helpful for you. But just to go to talk about ITAD's experience and approach, and I've identified some challenges that we face, and we think that organisations, be it science, kind of foundations, donors, non-governmental organisations, other consultancies face in measuring, evaluating, and learning about government's work. So I've got a few slides up there. I was going to go through the slides, and we can refer back to them. And just to give you some kind of some of our thinking, but then feel free to ask any questions you like about either reference to those slides or anything that you would want to hear about, and we'll do our best to answer. We do have some promotional materials around the table, just to kind of say that yes, we do produce kind of paper. It's not all online. But so feel free to take those away, and business cards are here as well.
Yeah, some really interesting practice papers on a number of issues that we've worked with their CDI, or Centre for Development Impact. So feel free to grab those or get a little bit of them online.
Great. So, so what do we do and why? So this is basically, this tries to capture our work as ITAD. So this is giving you the kind of the company's perspective, and Andrew might want to add a little bit on that afterwards. But so what do we do? Well, we're a consultancy company of over 30 years. We've got 85 people in our company. We're based in Brighton, so we're UK based. We provide thought leadership on a number of areas, and both thematic areas and how to evaluate, how to monitor, how to learn. We believe that our way of working based on kind of values and principles is collaborative, it's authentic. We think that we have a track record of providing technical excellence to clients. Those clients can be UK government, UN, other European governments. They can be non-governmental organisations, foundations like Hewlett Foundation, Gates Foundation, for example. One of the reasons Andrew and I are here this week is to explore work with foundations. We believe strongly that all of our work should be not just useful but also be used. So evidence use is quite critical, and I'll come on to that later. We have robust methods and a whole range of methods which we employ in ITAD. We acknowledge the kind of the accountability kind of imperative of a number of donors, particularly bilateral and state donors, of getting results and demonstrating impact. And we do try and, within all of our work, think about how we're making a difference as ITAD to help others demonstrate they're making a difference. And that is quite important. Well, that's kind of critical for our kind of raison d'etre. Andrew, anything to add?
Yeah, just I guess to say that we cover 11 thematic areas. I mean, Richard leads on governance and gender, or has a team that works on that. We have health and education, organizational effectiveness, which is our kind of, in some ways, our kind of strategy, management consulting side. We work extensively in fragile and conflict-affected states. We work in climate change, private sector development, and impact investing as well. So we have a really broad sort of set of themes that we cover. And I think one of the benefits of that is we've got a lot of learning, a lot of experience. We kind of try to distill down into some really kind of key approaches.
And one of the things that I'll touch on is we are bringing learning from some of the other themes into our governance work and into our gender work. We're also, and vice versa, we're bringing some of our gender analysis, or we've got this framework doing gender analysis, which we're bringing into other work as well, into other themes. So it's very important that we as a company demonstrate that we learn within our themes, and we have also a knowledge hub which kind of consolidates a lot of that learning and then sees how we can disseminate and share more widely. Right. So in relation to our governance, and that though the kind of the icons down there kind of depicts kind of the themes which Andrew was mentioning. So the next three slides is kind of like, what do we do? How do we apply ourselves in governance work? And when I say governance work, we focus on monitoring, evaluation, and learning, and kind of this and supporting the strategy of various clients. We're not an implementer per se. We work with implementers as the M&E learning provider. And it does differ. So we conduct a number of independent evaluations. We are monitoring and with a primary focus on accountability and results. We are also more of a long-term, they're kind of your, evaluation. Someone wants a formative or summative evaluation over a period of, say, 9 months, and we provide that evaluation. And that can be quite good fun and enjoyable, but it's kind of got a finite nature to it. The more interesting ones, I think, are the second and third areas. As an M&E partner, alongside programs like the Pearl in Nigeria, the whole government's work with DFID, to working alongside Palladium and working alongside DAI. We've worked alongside British Council, and we're currently working alongside ActionAid on an anti-corruption program as the M&E partner. And then with the third element is as a strategy and learning partner with a kind of a primary focus on utility. And that is really, it's kind of monitor evaluation partner plus, where we're actually getting it really into the DNA of an institution or an NGO. And if we're successful from our interview this morning between Development Gateway and ITAD, we'll be doing that with the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. So they were interviewing us very early hours of the Washington morning. Next slide. So that's we learn from our experience. We also like to think we innovate. A lot of what we do in governance, it's typically complex. You will work in the kind of the governance arena. It's political by nature. A lot of our work is political. Understanding that politics is critical for us, and understanding the politics of different stakeholders is crucial, and understanding that it's an ever-changing environment. So we believe that we should also be innovative, iterative, have bespoke approaches to M&E, avoid off-the-shelf methods and tools, although we do have frameworks and models that we'll kind of adapt and see if they're kind of viable for certain kind of solving certain problems. And it's not a non-linear process, so it's a nice UK coastline here to say that you don't swim from A to B, you actually go a different way around.
I was trying to work out where it didn't look like Brighton.
It's not Brighton, because there's only one pier standing. It's somewhere in Britain.
Oh, it's very funny though.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's Britain.
Actually, just whilst we've got to know, let Alison and Ethel, why don't you just introduce yourself?
Yes,
You go first.
well, my name is Ethel Mendez and I work here with ACFO, the Dutch NGO that helps people use data. We do software, but we also do advisory on M&E.
I'm Alison. I work with the Transparency and Accountability Initiative, our senior learning officer.
Cool. And I should say there might be one or two slides here which Alison is familiar with, because I've presented at a DAI learning event in Paris few weeks ago. And thirdly, we adapt. And we have to adapt our M&E work, our learning, our strategy support. And these are some of the challenges which come up, and there is a slide which I'll present in a minute on challenges. We ourselves as M&E and learning specialists, we also need to think and work politically. We're well into the kind of the whole doing development differently debate. We're kind of networked with people like Duncan Green, and we're doing very close work with IDS. Just came out of a meeting with Jonathan Fox, but there was that kind of whole kind of area of thinking, working, particularly doing development differently. We also recognise that donors and implementers and initiatives, governance initiatives, there's that tension between adaptive programming, machinery of government, and donors' results agendas. And there's that tension between how can you be adaptive when you also want results, and how can you marry the two, and where we're continuously grappling with and helping others to grapple with those kind of tensions. And we also take into consideration problem-driven, iterative, adaptive approaches. I use kind of the whole PDIA kind of approach to in a design, an evaluation and a design of a major governance program in Uganda recently for ITAD, called the Democratic Governance Facility in Uganda, where PDIA principles were embedded within that approach. And it challenged staff, because staff were transitioned from something fairly traditional of a governance program into something where the donors were saying, yeah, we want something more adaptive. We like the PDIA principles, let's test here. Next slide. So this is our governance portfolio. Our portfolio evolves continuously. It is a lot dependent upon obviously what we bid for, how we engage with clients. But broadly, we do a lot of work in empowerment accountability. We do a fair amount of work in public sector reform, increasingly in transparency and anti-corruption work. We've built up an anti-corruption portfolio recently. And we design and implement mail systems. So that's kind of the more kind of across the board kind of governance programs where we're developing kind of, we're designing, implementing and reporting on mail systems. And I've kind of linked kind of adaptive programming here. In these boxes here are just a number of our examples. So we're doing some research around empowerment accountability with IDS and with Oxfam and with Jonathan Fox and others. We're doing quite a lot of anti-corruption work at the moment where we're evaluating on any partner. And I've also brought in there the work with Hewlett Foundation, the Hewlett Foundation, where we're supporting over 4 years a formative evaluation as their partner on their transparency, participation and accountability program. So that's gone through the design phase and now we're starting to implement. Next slide. I thought just kind of communicating with Alan on this about, well, what are the challenges in M&E and governance that we think are coming up, and what clients are talking to us about and saying we really, you know, kind of something messy here, or something we're kind of struggling with, or something that we really need kind of, you know, some real thinking on. Can you come and help us on this? And at the top of this is that Andrew and I were discussing this kind of earlier today. It's what is critical is for us is to understand the culture of an institution, to see the usefulness, the utility of M&E and learning in governance. And we've had conversations over the last couple of days where people said, well, actually, there's not a convincing, it's not necessarily convincing that we need an evaluation or that we need to go down this route. And I think it's trying to understand the DNA of that institution and trying to understand where they're coming from. I think that always kind of is an important starting point for us as ITAD, because it might be an evaluative process, but you don't talk about evaluation because it might be seen as something, oh, they're going to talk about all accountability, whereas actually what they want is learning. So we're very careful about how we use our language and adapt. So the challenges which are in the green and in the grey are some of how we've been responding. So challenges come up, people have been asking, so how do we measure political access and influence? We've got to develop, to give you an example, we've got a development program we're evaluating with the MLE partner for DFID to their support to the Palestinian Authority. And they're saying, how do we, as UK government, measure our influence to achieve the development outcomes of our program, of our funding? How do we measure that? So we sat back and we said, well, look, we've got a political access and influence tool where we can measure individuals and institutions and about how you engage both at the Palestinian Authority side and at the UK government official side, about how you actually engage with each other, and we can kind of measure that, and it's kind of a tool that we pilot. We've also got what we call these policy advocacy measurement trackers, which we use in other work. And some of this stuff is completely new, and it's like, well, actually, we can have a blank sheet of paper, let's listen to what you want, and actually then let's develop it, rather than actually we've got something which we could do, because that may be the wrong way about it. So it goes back to an earlier point I was making. And then others say, well, how do you identify champions for reform, particularly on those kind of public sector reform programs? And how do you avoid elite capture? How do you measure how programs are not captured by elites? And those kind of elites could be within civil society, they could be within government. So it's quite a sensitive area. It's about, so the way we come in this, we have different ways of doing power analysis, but you don't just do it at the outset in political economy analysis. We've recently been looking at political economy analysis, how it's been used on a day-to-day basis, but people don't call it political economy analysis. They call it something quite different, because you wouldn't come in every day in the office when I do political economy analysis, but that people do, they engage in it, but in a ways that it's people like us who then kind of capture it and then just listen to them, accompany them, observe, and then we record and we say, does that reflect back how you're doing your work, how you're engaging with, this is a civil society organisation, how you're engaging with public officials, how you're engaging with private sector, for example. We're doing a lot of work at the moment in evaluating adaptive programmes. We're doing a number of case studies looking at adaptive programs in Myanmar, in Nigeria, and probably in Pakistan as well, and writing up some case studies which will come online soon, or at least the Myanmar one, and we're doing that jointly with Duncan Green from Oxfam. We're grappling with this whole issue about how do you measure social change. We've got some examples of how we measure social norms and behaviour change. So how we measure social norms of a major gender programme in Nigeria called Voices for Change, which sadly has come to an end. We've got some ways of how we've kind of approached that. How we also engage, how measure and how donors or programs, initiatives engage non-traditional actors, and looking at those kind of areas. And then other kind of issues, challenges which have been kind of, which have come to us over the last couple of years is, so how do we demonstrate downward accountability, beneficiary feedback? I mean, you're probably going to be a much better kind of voice than I am on this, but how do you kind of measure that kind of beneficiary feedback coming, and then what actually happens to that beneficiary feedback? How does that actually influence the programme? Whose voices are you listening to? So when you go into a community, are you actually getting the right people, or who is actually, bringing a focus group together, for example? The making use of evidence and research, which is kind of a critical area for us. We just finished an evaluation of a program called Building Capacity for the Uptake of Research and Evidence. And we've got some really good examples about within civil society and in the public sector in a number of countries of how evidence and research and evidence is actually used for policy making and programming. So there's some good stuff on our website on that as well. And then lastly is kind of the whole attribution contribution, is that a lot of donors say, well, we know we can't talk about attribution, but how do we actually really demonstrate we're contributing something when there are so many other players involved and so many other actors? So we love our theory-based approaches in governance and testing assumptions, evaluation questions, and using contribution analysis. And then I think the final slide. So this lovely green it's very luminous. This is not ITAD colour. I will be shocked when I get that. But this, I just thought, okay, let's just say what's our approach? What do we bring together? I think a lot of our work is theory-based in governance. We do focus kind of, as methods, kind of doing a whole range of different kind of case studies and doing comparative analysis and syntheses. But we always kind of think, well, it's always going to be a mixed methods approach. And it kind of sounds, well, that's kind of, yeah, it always is, isn't it? But we kind of think, actually, there's a range of things which we can bring together. So I just wanted to put some of the things that we've applied in governance work for a range of clients. So on outcome harvesting, there was one client which said, actually, we've got this program, it's very adaptive, we don't know what the outcomes are going to be. We're prepared to take those risks. And so we came in with, well, okay, we will have a process where we will kind of track back. And I think we actually use a combination of outcome mapping, outcome harvesting together. I think there might be one final slide. Yeah, why be interested in M&E? I think this is just some, this is just, I think, saying kind of for us what works in M&E and governance. So developing together and using informed political economy analysis, designing theories of change. We're continuously reconstructing theories of change for clients to really understand, is that what they really see their program as, and doing it in a non-linear way as well, which is always a challenge, particularly on a piece of paper or on a slide. Demonstrating the value of data and evidence, which I referred to, and ensuring strong, consistent feedback loops into decision-making and programming, which I think is critical. Some of the more, I think, progressive and enlightened clients kind of say, yeah, actually, we really want to see how we learn from the evidence and how that's fed back and how we actually inform our work. I think that's the last slide.
Cool.
We have blank.
Let's see what's next.
Yeah, exactly. So I won't go through the examples.
We won't go through the examples.
I
was told not to. Not yet.
Yeah, so I would refer to.
Yeah, cool. Very good. Thanks very much, Richard. I have many questions and points of connection, but I'll shut up because I have lots of opportunities to talk to ITAD colleagues. So open it up to questions to anyone in the room. Anta Munyema, you still with us, Munyema?
I am, and I have a lot of questions, but let me know if I can go over it.
Cool. Okay, I'll give you a shout in a couple. Yeah. Who would like to kick off?
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I'd be interested to hear more about your approach for monitoring anti-corruption program. This is like a component that you talk about, and if you could share a little bit more about your experience in this field, that especially the monitoring rather than the evaluation. It would be great also if you can talk about the evaluation for what tools you use, what challenges you face, especially shifting from perceptions towards like real evidence on progress regarding anti-corruption.
Let's take 2 or 3 questions.
I'm not sure I know what outcome mapping and outcome harvesting is. Sounds intriguing to me, and happy to expose my ignorance of it.
One more question, Michael.
Yeah, so you talked a good bit about how with your clients you go through what essentially sound like co-creation processes of helping them figure out what sorts of MEL systems would be useful to you. But I'm wondering to what extent, and you also talked about beneficiary feedback, but I'm wondering to what extent, rather than doing co-creation with your clients, you like facilitate processes of co-creation between your clients and those beneficiaries, and like to what extent local stakeholders are involved in the processes that you guys help with.
Cool, very good. Richard, Andy, want to take those?
Outcome mapping, outcome harvesting. My distinction between the two, but I stand to be challenged. I like to say,
what are they first before talking about the difference between the two?
Well, I mean, for me, you've got a standard kind of program will have, it wants to achieve a level of outcomes. So, standard is inputs, outputs, outcomes, and you have your intermediate outcomes and your long-term outcomes, and then your impact. So the way I've used outcome mapping, but I know it's used in other ways as well, is for monitoring. So you monitor how the outcomes, the progress towards outcomes over time, and you can change those outcomes. Now I know that other people use outcome mapping in a slightly different way in terms of more evaluative way. Outcome harvesting, which I've only used once before, but outcome harvesting is actually, you're not too sure what the outcomes are going to do. It's a much more of how I've used it, is much more retrospective. So you come to the end, towards the end of the program or a certain stage, and then you say, okay, so what was achieved here? And then you kind of track back. I'm looking at an M&E specialist and he's nodding, so I think I've got
100%
right.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
So outcome mapping is kind of you move forward and monitor. Outcome harvesting, you track back. Outcome harvesting, I find really appealing. But it's a horrible phrase actually. But it's kind of I don't know, yeah. But I find it very appealing. If you've got a donor who is saying, we really buy into you, your initiative, your institution, your way of working, your process. Let's see. Let's just, we buy into that. Let's just see what happens. And then you come in at the end stage and you say, okay, this is what happened, but we didn't actually map it out. And then you kind of map that. I do stand to be correct. The measuring anti-corruption, monitoring anti-corruption programs. So we have two anti-corruption piece of work. We have two anti-corruption programs which we're working on. One is, it was my first one that I won for ITAD, which was to evaluate, but actually I won, it's always a team effort. We won. It was to evaluate DFID's Caribbean anti-corruption program. And why I'm smiling because of the word Caribbean, because I suddenly became very popular, but then unpopular because people realized they might be going to the Caribbean, which is it's very rare in a British context to go to the Caribbean. So it was for some reason got very popular. So we're currently evaluating this anti-corruption program in the Caribbean, and we're also the M&E partner to ActionAid for a DFID anti-corruption program in Nigeria called SCRAP-C. I mean, being Nigerian, you've got these great names, and they work. They work kind of. They think, does it work on the street? So SCRAP-C is scrap corruption, but the actual scrap is also an acronym which stands for something. The first one, the Caribbean one, is all your kind of it's kind of corruption at the kind of that global grand corruption level. It's political corruption, it's drugs, violent crime, police corruption, police killings. So it's all about law enforcement, and it's evaluating independent, kind of state and parastatal anti-corruption institutions and UK government support to them, mainly in Jamaica. It is an evaluation. Our experience of that, kind of what works, is you go through the examples. So what works? Well, this, actually no, the first one. So this is our team. This just demonstrates that it's not just me. I'm just one small part of a whole team working on this. This is our core team of internationals and nationals, 4 of whom are anti-corruption experts, 2 in the University of West Indies. Our 2 leads, very interestingly in corruption work, particularly this side of corruption, are both women. And then we've got Aoife, who works with me. So this is our whole team. This is just to demonstrate within ITAD, we've got a whole team working on this, both kind of back support and backroom support, as well as kind of the front end, which is this end here. But what we felt this was a very successful project, because what we got right was right from the get-go, we had a strong relationship, not just with the client, but with the institutions. So they had real buy-in. We had a theory of change that we developed, and I think this is the co-creating point, that we developed in a participatory way right from the outset. We didn't start with a blank sheet. We started with a review of their documentation, these 3 institutions, and we interpreted from what they were saying to us. So we did a lot of listening. We interpreted from what they were saying to us about their own theory of change. Everybody has a theory of change, but you don't need to have a model. I mean, some people get obsessed by having just a model, but you need a narrative. There's always a narrative behind it. So we were listening to their kind of narrative. So I think we had, in terms of a theory of change-based approach, it's contribution analysis which we're applying to it. It's highly sensitive because you're talking about political corruption and the links with drugs and criminal gangs. And so who we interview, we had to be very careful. So there were ways of interviewing. So one of our national staff members has his networks. He's much more of a kind of a streetwise academic, whereas the other academic, Anthony, is very much a kind of, he's at that kind of institutional level. So I think we've pitched it right in terms of the individuals. And all of our tools which we developed, I think were done in a very participatory way, and we knew who could interview who. So some of the methods that we used with our key informant interviews were, we wanted to get an idea of the impact of one of these institutions, which is called MOCA, which is looking at kind of corruption in the public sector. That we interviewed a number of lawyers who would defend clients where there was a MOCA case coming to court. And we would defend, and so we were interviewing, we decided to interview the lawyers, not the people who were coming to court or in jail. We're interviewing the lawyers and to see whether they would charge more for a MOCA case because it came from than another kind of similar case. And we found out that they did charge more. And that was a way of saying, well, actually, if what lawyers were saying, I'm going into a little bit of detail, what lawyers were saying were, if you've got a MOCA case, that means the evidence base is stronger than another case. So therefore, for us, we tried to then triangulate, or we're trying to triangulate, does that mean that MOCA has more of an impact? and through the support that UK government are giving to them. And just very quickly, we did a theory of change. The next slide. So this was our theory of change. So this was the bits in green are the bits to look at. We worked with these 3 institutions. We worked with DFID, and we said, well, look, your intervention is designed and informed by contextual analysis. These also informed our evaluation questions. So did they? And I think by and large they did. We also came up with a set of assumptions which fed directly into our evaluation questions. So they understood the logic, they understood where we were coming from with our evaluation questions, because we'd agreed a set of assumptions. So they were linked. Each assumption was linked to an evaluation question. They knew where we're coming from on that. And we said this is for it had accountability, but it's also for learning. And these are the institutions here. There's 4 of them. That is how can this be useful to them as well as to the donor, to DFID. We identify and establish the right. Well, this was a question. Had the donor identified and established the right institutional partnerships? And then this goes all non-linear, because what we recognise is you go through the court process, and then there are assumptions about the judicial process in Jamaica. But this whole area, which is just fascinating, which is understanding change is not a linear process, and kind of trying to measure social change, and the whole kind of issue of social norms within corruption work, about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And so we're exploring that area as we come to an end of the this evaluation. And really getting into, are people prepared to stick their necks out and be champions for anti-corruption? I've kind of answered that question in a very detailed way. The facilitate co-creation between, I think this is an example really. I think it's critical, and this is this is an evaluation that we're doing, but we wanted to co-create this theory of change at the outset, not just with the donor, but with the institutions. They actually do buy into the whole evaluation right throughout. Because we could come up with a fantastic looking theory of change, and they'll go, oh yeah, okay, that looks nice, but we weren't part of it. We don't get where you came from. So that co-creation, not just in the design, but making sure, this is actually now changing, following our teams gone back a 3rd time to Jamaica, and they're kind of re-changing this because they've had another workshop based on this. So we're continuously co-creating with them. It's an iterative process.
Munima, do you want to jump in? I think you might leave, have you?
I do. Thank you.
So sorry, I was not able to look at the slides, so if there are any questions that I'm asking that were already answered, I apologize for that. So I have 3 questions. First one, just very basic, in terms of your evaluation work. Have you evaluated other multi-stakeholder initiatives, either in the governance field or not in the governance field? That would be great to know, and which ones those are. The second one is, you mentioned your MLE plus track as kind of really getting into the DNA of an organization, and just thinking about when you actually do an evaluation. I think getting into the DNA of an organization is critical if you really want to do a good evaluation. But then it also sometimes, getting too much into the DNA of an organization means that you might, as an evaluator, lose your independence or objectivity. And so I was wondering if you have any strong views on that, and exactly what kinds of activities you follow to really maintain independence and objectivity. And then the last question is, you talked a bit about contribution versus attribution, and this is obviously very important when it comes to governance programs, in evaluating complex governance programs. From your work, from your evaluation work, are there any interesting examples where you have used counterfactuals methods? That's the last one. I'll stop there.
So use counterfactuals.
Anyone else?
I'm gonna have to leave soon, but so sorry for showing up late and leaving early. But I'm interested in hearing more about your work around research use and evidence use, and how you guys are measuring that.
I think I probably should answer that question first.
Mm-hmm.
Be good.
Thank you.
I think the one that Andrew and I will talk about, we talk about a lot because we've just completed the evaluation, and there is a slide up here as well. That's not the next one. Not that one. Not that one. Not that one. That one. So I would go to our website and have a look. So we did a 3-year realist evaluation. I've never done the realist evaluation. And realist evaluation, some people will say, well, actually, that's kind of packaging things which we've been using for years and years. But it's got this kind of terminology as realist evaluation. That we used, it was a 3-year evaluation of DFID's building capacity for the uptake of research and evidence. And I think what it was, and what we're, I mean, this is kind of, I suppose, demonstrating some of the results from it, of what we thought was successful coming out of it. And we had a whole kind of theory, again, we had a theory of change behind it, and we were testing that theory of change, and as a result, coming out of that theory of change, we were saying, well, look, you've got civil society and the media use evidence in engagement with government and greater evidence use, and so I mean, it was classic kind of focus group discussions and key informed interviews, I understand, and so kind of with civil society, with media, but also with state officials as well, and we this is just a way of presenting how the end results of the evaluation. The examples which I probably like most out of this, which are saying, well, actually what we found after 3 years is there's some good evidence that that because of this capacity building support that was provided, and interviewing people and talking to people, I think there were some surveys as well. But I think it's the interviews and the focus group discussions which have inevitably can have more impact, much more of an investment. I understood that Mel was involved, Andrew, in a couple of surveys on this. So there was that kind of surveys which give you some qualitative and some quantitative kind of data. But I think what was coming out was some really good examples of where research and evidence has been used in policy making and programming. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's, if you go onto our website, there's quite a lot of stuff on BCure there. Okay. And if you want to follow up with us, just contact one of us, and we'll link you into the people. It's a person in our knowledge hub called Mel Clinton, and Rob Lloyd, who's one of our associate directors, and they'll be more than happy to follow up on that as well. On contribution, I'm going backwards now. Contribution versus attribution, have we used counterfactuals? I would say no. We were having a discussion earlier today with Jonathan Fox about the use of RCTs in governance work, and we know Matt Andrews' kind of view on the use of RCTs in governance work. I'm probably more ambivalent. I haven't kind of gone down that route. I think it's always seems very tricky in governance, but I kind of really like someone to try. So maybe that's a kind of pushback, and maybe it's for us to kind of give it a go as well.
But I mean, there have been plenty of organisations who have done RCTs in relation to governance.
Yeah.
JPAL has done quite a lot, and lots of other organisations have as well. But I mean, it is really striking from ITAD's self-presentation that, I mean, I've never heard ITAD, and personally I think this is a good thing, I've never heard ITAD talk about using RCTs in its work. I've never even heard you talking about experimental or quasi-experimental approaches to monitoring and evaluation, which is really interesting that you've been able to create a sustainable business in doing MEL without going down the path of doing experimental, quasi-experimental RCT type approaches to MEL. So I'm kind of, it's kind of amazing that you've managed to do that. To be honest.
Well, it's not really our forte, but also it's, we have people on our books, not within ITAD. We have a big network of consultants who've got RCT experiences, particularly in the health sector.
I mean, it's expensive, it's complex, it's difficult to manage, and methodologically there can be issues with it. So, and
we did use it in some resilience work.
Yeah,
So I went to a brown bag lunch within ITAD where they presented some use of RCTs in a humanitarian program, I think in Bangladesh, and I questioned the ethics of it. The ethics of doing, of having a control group where humanitarian aid doesn't come in, and another group where humanitarian aid does come in. And personally, I'm not knocking RCTs, but in that particular context, it just made me feel uncomfortable.
I think Len Pritchett has just published a masterful deconstruction, not to say destruction, of RCTs in the presentation he made, I think at Harvard. And you can find it online. It's 60 slides or something.
60 slides, wow.
There's not much left after.
Just to be clear, I was not advocating use of RCTs.
No, I know, but I think that you know, he was not also.
Yes.
So very critical of them, but he has done an amazing amount of work. And in particular, some of the things that you have problems with have been exposed.
Yeah.
So,
in terms of our M&E and Learning Plus, how do we avoid being co-opted when we're getting really into the DNA? Recently, I wrote an inception report for our M&E partnership on one of our programs about how we're an M&E partner working alongside the donor, the which is providing financial aid, the technical assistance, the TA provider, and then there's us, and we're the partner. We're the M&E partner. And what we're doing is validating and verifying, or verifying and validating monitoring data that's coming out by both the donor providing financial aid and the TA provider. We've also, but it's a 4-year contract, so we'll be reporting on this on an annual basis. We're doing fiduciary risk assessments as well as annual reviews, and we've got this kind of learning kind of facility as well, where we've been doing kind of the deep dive kind of case studies. But at the end of it, we've also got in our contract to do an independent evaluation, and it's called an independent performance evaluation. So what we built in is how do we maintain our independence so we're kind of more analyzing, validating kind of data, monitoring data. We're not going to gather it ourselves. That's kind of one way. But in terms of the actual evaluation part, what I've built in is to have a peer review panel which is completely independent of the team and of ITAD, who can actually give us that kind of quality assurance that we're following the right path. And there are some other things which I've built in as well to keep that independence, because the donor's saying, well, you know, we think you've been too strong on this, we think you'll be independent. So no, but if we're going to be working as a partner, and if it's as a joint, it's not as a joint partner because it never is. If you've got a client with, in the power relationship, but we say we've got to build in this kind of structure and independence, and we do want them to pay for it as well, to have, two high quality people. We're also going to get people doing the evaluation who are different to those leading the evaluation, who are different to those who are leading the 4 years of doing M&E. So that's kind of, so that the dynamics will be different between the individuals involved.
I think our problem is less about being losing our independence and more presenting the difficult messages. So we often have reports that present very difficult messages back to clients. So we're just evaluating NORAD's approach to results-based management, and essentially it's not there, and that's gone to the minister, and that was a very difficult thing. We've had worked through a strategic review of the Global Fund in 2017, looked at that and get some very, very difficult messages back. So I think that reputation we have for independence is what clients get, and we just, as Richard said, build that in structurally, governance, quality assurance, right the way through the process.
And then the other question was it evaluation of multi-stakeholder initiatives?
Yeah.
That's right.
So one of the first things that, well, just before I joined ITAD, so I'm going to bring it in because we can share it, because then I did a follow-up from it, is evaluated the democratic governance facility in Uganda, which is an 8-donor governance initiative. It's a massive governance program. So I led the evaluation team when I was at Triple Line. And interestingly, talking about being kind of principles, is that, so we submitted the evaluation. We were asked to look at this program. It's quite a standard, old-fashioned kind of, if I can say, traditional governance program. Not necessarily that wrong with that, but we were asked to look at it through an adaptive programming lens, something that wasn't designed to be adaptive, but they wanted it to be evaluated through an adaptive programming lens, which was quite interesting. And then I was asked, when I was at ITAD, to lead the design of the next phase. And there's a whole kind of making sure that there wasn't a conflict of interest there. So we brought in a completely new team to do that, and my terms of reference were quite different. And that was designing this multi-stakeholder initiative then. Other multi-stakeholder initiatives we've evaluated, I'm just trying to think within ITAD.
Adolescent 360, where there's multiple foundations involved in funding it, and that's almost an interesting challenge when you have two very powerful foundations with very strong agendas and difficult things to say from evaluation and learning point of view.
We've looked at a few UN joint programs, like the UN joint program on female genital mutilation and cutting, which is UNFPA and UNICEF. That's two stakeholders. So yeah, I mean, we do have that track record of working with kind of a range of initiatives.
Right? Any final questions from within the room?
Thank you.
I have a question, but I'll leave it with you, and we can maybe talk about it later. It kind of relates to something that Michael raised. It's kind of a question about sustainability, really, and how you manage the tension. Because on the one hand, I guess what you would really like to do, maybe, is to help organisations to develop the capacity to do their own MEL so that they don't need ITAD in future. On the other hand, ITAD, I guess, wants to continue existing and to continue having clients to build MEL capacity. So how do you is that a tension you feel? How do you manage that? How do you do your work in such a way that it builds the capacity of local partners to carry on doing things after you're gone?
Question. I think it should be a tension, and not just within ITAD or consultancies.
Yeah.
And I say it should be Because if we're not, then if that's not one of our values, and it is one of our values, then you could, yeah, then what, yeah, what are we kind of, is it just that we're coming in, doing a piece of work, making some money from it, obviously, because it has a money figure attached to it, and saying, yeah, we did a good job. I think part of doing that good job, and it's not just about building the capacity and working, it's not just about building capacity of a national, or if you can say a local partner or individuals, it's also within the team. So we do look about bringing younger members of staff into projects and making sure that they are not just, they don't feel that they're task driven, that they're also empowered. Our work in Palestine is done jointly with two recent projects have been done with a national counterpart, a Palestinian consultancy. We believe that working together and that we're wanting to work together, it's mutually beneficial. Yes, to win work, but also, you know, building the capacity within that relationship. So I think, yeah, but it's not just about. It's also, I think we're good at sharing our knowledge and tools and methods and ways of working because we believe in them, and we're very happy to share that knowledge, and hopefully, biggest success if 5 years down the line someone saying, oh, you know that thing you did at ITAD, we're using it now, and this is how we're using it. So we don't copyright it, we're not precious about it. I think part of our DNA is to say, well, great if others can use what we're doing, as long as it's kind of what we're doing successfully, not.
We do a huge amount of M&E, male capacity development with grantees through things like Global Fund and their advocacy portfolio, and looking at civil society organisations there. So that's our bread and butter work. And other things like ITAD and country offices, male support as well, capacity development.
But in some ways, your question, Alan, is almost more existential for the consulting industry.
That's true.
It's not, Michael Porter does a lot of business with organizations that you can't say lack capacity.
Yeah.
So there's the outside looking in. Even though you try to understand the DNA, you bring your own DNA into it.
Yeah.
And that's a very big difference. Plus, you can bring experiences of other organizations.
You'll find a lot of ITAD people come from civil society backgrounds, also come from government backgrounds. I mean, I had my formative years of 10 years in civil society. I've always worked in civil society, so I think I would not be true to myself if I came into a consultancy and ditched all of that kind of commitment to capacity building. But also, consultants can be as committed to capacity building as civil society organisations. It's just different. It's very different.
Cool. Very good. Thank you very much. I know Richard and Andrew are going to be around a bit longer this afternoon if people want to grab them. You've got their cards if you want to follow up. Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you, guys.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you for lunch.
It wasn't us, it was take the Capital Group.
The Capital Group, whatever.
We pay them to work.
That's true, they are taking between 0.23 and 0.7%.
Come back to sustainability.
You're welcome.
Have a great day. Awesome.
You could probably work your way around these.
Yeah, there's a lot of
small
new form of currency, isn't it?
It's not Bitcoin. It's Bitcoin.
That's a far better point.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
are you?
I
Oh, I still
I
look
wanted
back
to
at
do
like my
that. So
first
you're
week
so
as a
sick.
senior, and I was
Totally,
doing my
yeah.
self-assessment, and that was like the most I ever talked to.
I
And now I just see, I'm like, oh yeah, that guy.
Yeah, we usually run tests. But are you going to the MRE this year?
I might say what?
Are you going to
We've
the
actually, when we meet,
Oh, I don't think
yes,
it's going to be me.
we're not.
I don't think it should be me. I don't think I'm the best person to like maximize that. Yeah, yeah. It was personally gratifying. I learned a lot, but so I don't know. I know that Lauren has a conflict, and so if it's down to Michael, it could be me.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm for sure to go.
Maybe that should be like our
Annual catch-up and stuff. Yeah.
Where is Thinky Valley, right?
Thank you, Valley.
Yeah, I've never been. Huh?
Is
Maybe.
Valley, is Rwanda Wakanda?
Say what?
Is Rwanda
I have
Wakanda?
to run, but I'll
Once in a while. Then I for sure would.
So you've seen that, no?
I have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering because it's so.
being
I
done
don't
really
know.
well. And
I think even just by name association just seems so cool.
Yes, that's true.
Well, thank you for your presentation. I mean, obviously, you and Ellen have
we always get,
talked
so,
quite a
we
bit.
get
I'm
so many
Johannes, also
requests
with Low
and
Integrity.
just recently with the foundation.
And all this in many
Because of our
different ways.
name
There's so many
and our
connections
network,
to what we do. and so
when
many
they want feedback
different
work done,
points.
they come to us.
I think
and
there
they're
are two
like,
things,
talking
two
to the
questions
right
that
user, they're
sort of
talking
more
to
specific you have.
individual
One
specimens,
is
but
the
often they're
process of
asking us
constructing
who
sometimes
else
retrospectives,
is doing good work,
sometimes
who,
in the
you know,
process
is in your
with their
network,
organization,
recommend
either change that
X, Y,
maybe
Z.
even growing their
So we're trying to
learning,
build it.
and it really more than that, right? It's a
Yes.
recommend of the
So
usually integrate that during.
sounds fantastic.
What's the experience
Nice to
in
meet
terms
you.
of
Cheers, thank you.
operationalizing that? Is that easy to do within 2, 3, 4 months? And how often do you really have to fight substantive battles, or like just nudge people within that organization to say, in order for us to really make progress on this in a meaningful way, you guys need internally to really go back to the. How does that play out?
I think when you've got it in your terms of reference, we want a theory of change to be reconstructed or constructed within the inception phase. You
I'm
know you've
Allison.
got.
I feel like we've emailed
Hi there.
perhaps.
Yeah, me well, son.
What is
It's
your
usually
name?
very easy.
Oh,
to
yeah.
do so.
Well,
And,
it's weird.
they'll say, yes,
Yeah,
we want to work in this, yes, we want to bring it up.
Yeah, so I do need to have to be an active.
It's when,
That's a good question.
You come in.
I
and
have my
doing
questions
the
ready.
value,
I was ready.
Fantastic.
Uh,
Thank you
Be
very much.
prepared.
That's good. That's good.
How long have you guys
They
been in
are-
DC?
Since last night, we were in New York for a couple of days.
And
Mhm.
what's kind of the actual aspect, and
Mhm.
that becomes kind of more difficult. I sometimes don't start with a model, because sometimes people just don't work on models.
I don't personally know that, but maybe my
What we did with
Sideways.
an evaluation
It's
on
useful to have those.
unit
Awakening
games,
Sit there
did
and
the base
think
pilots work.
It's quite interesting.
They went out to
Going for
India
another 3 hours and talk about
first,
it.
or the
Yeah.
pilot
No, it's
of
interesting. So
the case study.
here today, and
Evaluation
tomorrow,
of
and
the
then
case
back
study.
tomorrow night.
They went to India. They came.
Oh,
out
you're
with
at the hub
models.
tomorrow or DC?
No, we're in DC tomorrow. I think we're
Mm.
who are we seeing
And you
tomorrow?
look at that, and they
I
say
can't remember who we're seeing.
that they
Yes, there's a
find
third person on that chain
if
whose
we
job it was
introduce-
to like
Yeah,
tell you
someone
where to
else's
go.
because they're now
Uh-huh.
constructing a global.
Yeah, no,
one
it's been a really good get to it here. We'll be out on a red.
This is the global one. We presented
Oh,
that
yeah.
With people and it's easier when you see
That
someone and
Mhm.
have a
visually
relationship
in their
with them to work
context,
with in the future.
they bought
Mhm.
into. So we were listening to how they describe things.
And have you guys done work with
picture
USAID?
things,
I think only
visualize things.
so
And
they third tier.
so
like
it's
partner, partner,
Yeah,
partner.
we would not
Mhm.
and the rest of the
my
US.
challenge
Thing.
is how to use that one in Uganda,
And
that one in
that's-
Guatemala, that one in
In
Pakistan.
this current environment,
on the other country.
not lost to us.
Indeed,
To a
indeed.
global one.
Yeah, what about you
And it's
guys?
the global one
Lots of
that
work
has
or
the
not?
client, USDA.
With USAID?
Yeah.
Well, Transparency and Accountability Initiative is an odd,
Yeah,
in my
but
previous
actually
life,
for the
yes,
Indian
I worked at a
office,
firm
that
that was
is
basically like an
the one
ITAD
that
in the US.
focus on.
It's called
We do
Social
quite a lot of
Impact.
that. We have kind of
And
a
so,
map
yes, all of it was
training,
USAID, all of it was kind of actual fund governance work. So that's what I did.
Which also
with
like
them.
it's then.
But yeah, now we're a funder
step
collaborative,
work.
so it's,
System thinking more
we're
general.
not like seeking
Yeah,
funding.
yeah.
It's a very
But
odd
does that
place
mean,
to
and
be.
I'm sorry, I'm probing
Little bit
here because somebody
uncomfortable,
does
mostly
a
joy.
challenge
It's
that I
like
recently
benefit
had is,
development, business
so if you
development
are
work
with
that
somebody like
is nice to
USDA,
take away.
Yeah.
For a couple of
Aren't
years.
there even like at the international level, let's say in the national,
Oh,
there's
yeah.
some incentive costs
Yeah,
between
yeah.
people
Yeah.
who run offices or run programs?
With TAI,
Yeah.
it's just a year.
Okay.
Johannes and I were
How
just
do you
working on that.
position
My
yourself
first
when
kind
you-
of week
when
on
you
the
learn
job.
that
I actually took
this
a
is
trip
not gonna
for
be even
TAI
within your
before I
term of
officially
reference?
started.
It's
And then
not
my
gonna
second
be
trip
a
was like
3-week or 4-week or even a month.
and it was at the Motivating
You
Governance
essentially,
weekend.
I mean, do you go
And
about this
so
by sort
that's
of like
when I
nudging
came
them
and I was
carefully and then
that's
stepping
like
back
the
and seeing even if the
only
time frame
time
becomes longer?
we
Or do
see
you
each other
sort of
all the
like,
time, of course.
you know, or do you get
So I don't
different
know, I
tactics
don't
of sort of like
expect that I'll
going
be
back to
one
the
to
very
go.
fundamental of why this matters,
Or
bringing
shouldn't
everybody
really,
as soon as
but
possible
it may
together
not.
to a, you know, closed door sit down and really talk about this from scratch. I mean,
it's amazing it's getting all these organizations
Yeah.
together.
Uh,
I wonder if it
For a practical
functions
level,
in
I
that
think
way or whether it's, you know, lots of separate
on that,
organizations.
obviously it's a real
I
case.
mean, I
study,
don't
a
know
real
if you'll have met before
Do you feel there's an
tomorrow,
appetite for them
Netta,
to
whose
come?
last name I'm not
Because you could,
remembering right
what
now.
we have done is
But
we
she's
presented
the
their
hub
change
director,
Okay.
and so
based
there's
on,
a small
okay,
kind of
we've
backbone
spoken to
team
you,
that
we think
runs
we get
the
it.
hub
That's a
initiative.
good change.
But there's a very
That's
strong collaboration
not
element
maybe
to
right.
it.
Yeah.
And I think
Do
that
you then
works.
say,
It's
okay,
very interesting. Like I can talk a bit about that. Just
how about we use that
and
as
so
the
how do
basis
you
to get what
foster
you want?
collaboration among
So we can have that workshop,
like
bring
just
people
totally
back
different
into
mandate,
it.
the mission
Is there an
provides
appetite
us
for
really
that?
resources
A lot of
big
well,
one.
sometimes I think
So
say, no,
yeah,
no, we
and so
can't
that
do
team kind
another
of sits
workshop
with
on this.
global integrity and
Okay.
development gateway.
Who
and
within
spearheads
your
the hub.
institution or within the
And so yeah,
client
so they
is
foster a lot
really
of
driving this
common,
and really
you know,
championing kind of theory of
groups,
change?
working groups
So
on
maybe
whatever.
we
And
go
there's supposed to be a monitoring
one to
evaluation
one
one.
level
Okay.
And I was
and
like, Netta,
reshape
I
it
cannot
and facilitate that
actively,
process.
I can't even like
And then we
manage a
come
list
back
for
to
this.
the
Like,
wider
I
group
can't
saying,
do it.
okay,
But there's very
with
few
this
people
one
here with
person
that
or these couple
function
of
or
people,
title,
you
it
could
turns
get
out.
this going
There's some, like, I
forward,
think this gentleman
and
was
you
from
say, okay, let's
IRI.
Yeah,
go
yeah,
through this
yeah.
together.
So he doesn't
Take
sit there,
ourselves
but
out
they're
of this wider
members
process.
of the
Yeah,
hub, so
and then
there's
we'll come
some
back and
bigger
present it
ones
back.
Yeah.
that have a pretty strong governance.
Okay.
Like NDI does as
It's,
well.
I think it's rare for us to kind of
And
think, actually,
Mercycorps and their governance
I
groups,
mean,
they
if
have
we've got it wrong, or
remote
if it's,
Yeah.
if there's that
and they use it for
tension
event stage and whatnot.
between the two.
But anyway, there's
I mean, I
other
did
here,
one with-
there's
with
very,
one
you know,
6
and then there's
months
groups
ago,
like us where
where I
like three
presented
full-time
this
people,
theory
and
Yeah.
so how do you
and they had a
do
real
that
kind of-
relative to
the
even global
problem was
integrity is
you're showing it
monstrous
as
compared
linear.
to us, but
We
then
want to show
developing
it
gateways and
as-
bigger OGP is huge,
Yeah, yeah,
and that's
yeah.
not even all of
vertical.
them, so
We
yeah,
want
it's
that
interesting.
bottom up.
They're
I said,
very
well,
proactive on that.
just inverse it. No, but we want you to
Yeah.
do that. I just said, but it
I've never quite on the mentioned
it
this
was
before.
really
That's
interesting
right.
there. That's what they were
Since I know how to
presenting.
find
And they were
both.
going, actually,
Yes,
we
do.
want
Not
you
take
to
a
do a bit of
Thank you.
change for that program there, or for your program, which is
Yeah, I
just
think
like
we're
the
meant
one
to
that
sit down
we
now.
worked
I think we are, yeah,
It's
we're
not,
for.
yeah, that's fine, but we're
And
definitely
I
moving somewhere else
reviewed
because
it,
it's
and I
very
was
warm in
really
here, and I'm gonna
So
fall asleep.
I'm glad you said it.
But that's
Oh,
what
and we're
they
definitely gonna
understood,
stop and
and
get
that's what they
caffeine.
said,
Yeah.
we designed that one
Oh,
internally.
We're
They
just
want
putting our
you,
annual,
and so then that's that
annual
tension
report out for
between,
last
okay,
year.
we are
Okay.
listening to them,
and of course
Um,
it's like, oh,
but there
I'm
are some
gonna like
flaws in
copy
that.
edit every square
do they have the
centimeter.
elements that's some of the flaws?
So it's
So
it will be,
for example,
it'll be good.
Good, good.
That's what took me a little bit of extra time before I
So
got here.
Will you be,
we,
is that getting mailed out or is it
let's look at
kind of
that one.
pull it from the website?
Virtual.
No, yeah, but
Oh, yeah, no, I'm sure it'll
Get
be,
more from this.
I don't know if it'll be a
You
separate
could
thing,
do
but
this,
for sure
this,
it'll be
and this.
featured in
Oh, well, that'd be really
our
interesting.
weekly
Could you do that? And then
digest
Okay.
when
came back to
it's ready.
to our
connect up with that,
they
get on it.
felt, okay.
Yeah, we've looked at a
You've come
bajillion
back,
different
you know,
examples
you
as
can
well.
do this. Okay,
And actually it'll be
accepted
interesting
that.
to see the track
now-
the changes in how we do our annual, it's different
We took
every year.
them
Yeah,
on that
yeah.
And
journey
next year I
and
actually
then
hope there's
do
monitoring
something
data
else.
in
And I did in the end.
it.
Actually, they didn't yet
Once we have a
accept
full year of
linear.
that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But this
Okay.
year there's not.
But they
it looks good.
got it, and we
Positive.
kind of reshaped
Yeah,
it.
yeah, that's a good rationale.
But it was just the model.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
because the narrative, the story was just the same.
It's so hot in here. I don't.
Or you could
sometimes
just
it's
say,
the
let's
opposite.
let's
Here,
just
like,
have we
you
got
just
the
come
story
to
right?
Arctic
If
and
we've got the
it's
story
really
right,
cold. But you definitely are
then
not. Honestly.
Equally, and in my particular case, I think the problem
New York
solved
yesterday,
now
it's
is
clear.
challenge.
I mean, it's really
sort of
exciting, lots of meetings. but
understanding or having that
yesterday
organization come together again on the base of self-control and it's a very good direction with all the traffic for the entire day or not. But I was just wondering if that ever comes out. Yeah, I mean, it's how they then sort of, and then that's probably the end of getting stay calm and sort of essentially switch questions back to them to understand what the problem is.
Where's the problem? What works for you? Or and then sometimes you're just going to make kind of that compromise. Okay, we'll just stop.
Yeah.
We won't look at that, but
Yeah, that's usually like I have to time that through, especially if I had a trip like that, so that I can go down and really see that. That last year is done.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and I've been also following.
Yeah, we'll definitely watch it.
I would say dive deeper into some of this.
Oh yeah, there's one that I was with last time where he's been to DC before.
Yeah,
The first
I
time.
came for the AE last year.
Oh, did you? How did you find that?
Really interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
probably to
You mind sharing
so
this PowerPoint with us?
What Alan's son got,
so
yeah.
it's interesting to surround these
Like 4,000 of them.
Very good. How long are you going to be staying in the temple?
But no, it's really interesting.
Tomorrow.
All right.
We were in New York for 2 days.
We were
We arrived
presenting
last night.
and
Mhm.
the gates and various others. So,
Mhm.
and
It's the first time in Washington.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
As I'm sure you can
Yeah, I mean,
Oh, yeah,
social
social
impact.
impact. Yeah, it was intense. It was very good.
Yeah.
to know
So you were there as well?
I was there,
No,
not, I mean, I was
so
there
I'm gonna
with
have another meeting, but
STI.
Helen and Michael will be.
I did
Michael
go to the
leads
social
on us
impact
for
of
stuff like the
but
meta level
thankfully
thinking,
I
how
didn't
we
have to do anything.
construct
I
and
did
nail
one roundtable
processes,
discussion
think about
with
them for both
somebody from
ourselves and then
USAID,
also bake them into.
Democracy, Human Rights and Governance Center,
Yeah.
and with the monitoring
Nudge
evaluation
people to
manager
bake
with
them
the
themselves
Fiscal
into their
Governance Program. Her
program.
microphone
So she was of when we
Do,
met
Jay
yeah, I worked with this,
Yeah.
I think Michael on our end leads
Jay,
on this. One of these, so.
two others.
I think you'll have a
from the-
starting conversation.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
it was
Yeah.
really interesting.
Very good, great.
And then we
Um,
met with Nathan and from the strategy team.
Nadia.
Oh, I don't know. I
Nadia,
don't know.
that's right. Interesting
Good.
as well. To kind of get Emily
Anywhere
established in this
at all? Yes.
amorphous,
Decentralized.
very nobody really wants it, filled with activists.
Yeah, it's an active
Yeah, yeah.
very different than some of our other members.
Absolutely.
We decided that we're not going to stay in this room.
Yeah,
because
too
it
hot.
is stifling hot, and
You've gone red in the face actually.
I haven't even presented. I feel red in the face, so and I also need some coffee, and I
Yeah,
you guys
I
will
think
too.
we're
So let's
absolutely.
take a stroll. Do you? I
Do you-
sent
do you
on
have-
this thing.
Do you have time?
I do have time. I was told to have time.
You were told to have time.
So your colleague was organizing.
Tim, that was.
Yeah. If you don't
Didn't
think
think about it. Really nice space.
I was just
Yeah.
saying that. Collaboration is.
it is that this